colleagues to UCI Great Big Read. I'm pleased to introduce Vice Chancellor Douglas Haynes.
Thank you so much, Marguerite. Good afternoon on this gorgeous Southern California day. I hope the sun is shining wherever you are. I want to thank you. I want to thank you for joining us today as the UCI Great Big Read presents Yuri Herrera Gutierrez. As you know, this program is made possible by a partnership, and I really want to acknowledge our partners in lifting us all up together. And that includes, of course, the Office of Inclusive Excellence, our UCI libraries, and our Division of Student Affairs. Together, we provide common reading selections and events that bring us together to celebrate diverse cultural backgrounds. And we do more in this process. We celebrate our solidarity in supporting inclusion during the current times of COVID that require us to be physically apart. To date, this program has brought together a number of important texts for discussion, for exploration. They include Kindred by Octavia Butler, Afterlife by Julia Alvarez, There There by Tommy Orange, and Becoming by Michelle Obama. As part of the UCI Great Big Read, we've held events such as informal book club discussions and enjoyed creative zine making about each book, and when possible, held cumulative conversations with authors. These books have shown us rich tapestries of interwoven topics covering multiple identities and cultures in our contemporary times. We are especially honored today to host this facilitated conversation with Yuri Herrera Gutierrez, Associate Professor in the Department of Spanish and Portuguese at Tulane University. He is the author of our current reading selection, Sign, Preceding the End of the World. In today's session, our conversation will be facilitated by Luis Desipio, who is a professor in the Department of Chicano Latino Studies, a professor and interim chair in the Department of Political Science, and chair of the Academic Senate Council for Equity and Inclusion. Luis will draw upon some of the book themes from Signs, as well as his own research, interest in immigration, and of course, curated questions from you to start the conversation. But we also want to invite all participants who are out there in our audience through the power of Zoom to share your questions, submit them through the chat function in the webinar format. I'm pleased to introduce our guest, Yuri Herrera Gutierrez, who will present a brief reading before we move into the facilitated conversation with them. When Signs Preceding the End of the World was published in 2015, no one could foresee the timeliness of this concise but impactful text. Both Herrera Gutierrez and his translator, Lisa Tillman, were honored with the 2016 Best Translated Book Award for Fiction, making Herrera Gutierrez the first Spanish-speaking language author, to receive this award. As his second novel, Signs, told a powerful tale about his protagonist, Marquina, as she crossed the border in search of her brother. Forever, the political scientist and literary journalist, Professor Herrera Gutierrez, takes us through contemporary times and tensions in all of his writings. From his first novel, and here I will use the English translation, Kingdom Comes, for which he received accolades as the best novel published in Spain, to his current historical writing of A Silent Fury, the El Bordo Mine Fire. He received his undergraduate degree in political science from the National Autonomous University of Mexico, a master's degree in creative writing from the University of Texas, El Paso, and a PhD in Hispanic language and literature from the University of California, Berkeley. Please join me in welcoming Yuri Herrera Gutierrez to the UCI Great Big Read and to UCI. Yuri?
Thank you very much, Douglas. Thank you, Luis. Thank you all for getting online for this. I'm really glad to do this. Well, as we were talking, I was talking with Luis before. I am an alumni of the University of California system. I would love to be in Irvine at some point, maybe not today, but at least we have this opportunity. So I really appreciate it, and I'm really glad to do it. So I'm going to start reading just a really short excerpt from the novel. This is the novel of a voyage, the voyage of Makina, a woman who has to go look for her brother. And in this voyage, she starts discovering a lot of things about her country, things about the country where she's traveling, things about her language and the other language, things about her identity. And the passage I'm gonna read is a moment when she just crossed the border into this other country that is unnamed, and she starts listening to these things that happen as soon as you are in this other place. It's not a sudden change, but it's like a feast of different kind of sounds and words. So this is it. This is chapter 5 of the novel. Well, the beginning of it. They are homegrown and they are Anglo, and both things with rabid intensity. With restrained fervor, they can be the meekest and at the same time the most careless of citizens, albeit grumbling under their breath. Their gestures and tastes reveal both ancient memory and the wonderment of a new people. And then they speak. They speak an intermediary tongue that Makina instantly warms to because it's like her, malleable, erasable, permeable, a hinge pivoting between two like but distant souls, and then to more, and then to more, never exactly the same ones, something that serves as a link. More than the midpoint between homegrown and Anglo, their tongue is a nebulous territory between what is dying out and what is not yet born, but not a hecatomb. Makina senses in their tongue not a sudden absence, but a shrewd metamorphosis, a self-defensive shift. They might be talking in perfect Latin tongue and without warning begin to talk in imperfect Anglo tongue and keep it up like that, alternating between a thing that believes itself to be perfect and a thing that believes itself to be perfect, morphing back and forth between two beasts until, out of carelessness or clear intent, they suddenly stop switching tongues and start speaking that other one. In it brims nostalgia for the land they left or never knew when they use the words with which they name objects, while actions are alluded to with an Anglo verb conjugated Latin style, pinning on a sonorous tale from back there. Using in one tongue the word for a thing in the other makes the attributes of both resound. If you say, give me fire, when they say, give me a light, what is not to be learned about fire, light, and the act of giving? It's not another way of saying things. These are new things, the world happening anew. Makina realizes, promising other things, signifying other things, producing different objects. Who knows if they'll last? Who knows if these names will be adopted by all, she thinks. But there they are, doing their damnedest. Well, thank you. Yes, to get started.
Thank you very much. That was a very evocative passage. Just to alert our audience, if you have questions, please put them in the Q&A chat, and I'll do my best to sort of integrate them into the questions that I'm asking. How do you first conceive of a writing task like writing opportunity like Signs Preceding the End of the World? What were your motivations in?
Well, for each book, I have something that I call the core of the book, which is something around which everything starts proliferating, which is a really important verb for me, how a book proliferates in an organic way. And what I had for this book was that I wanted to do a book about a voyage. And when I started thinking about it, immediately I knew what kind of voyage it was going to be, because I have been really close to the migration issues all my life. I have lived in many different places, but also I have been thinking for a while about using the Mexica, what is called in other spaces Aztec narrative of the descent to Mictlan, which is a description, a really broad description of what a dead person would have to do in order to get to the land of the dead. And even before researching this, all the traces of this narrative, I thought that there was the structure of a novel, because you have, it was like a matrix. And because you have this, each individual that is getting rid of the characteristics that makes this individual a living being until this individual gets to the land of the dead. And I thought that this would be great structurally, but also symbolically, because it would help me to reflect on the transformational virtues of traveling, you know? So that was the main thing, a transformational voyage. And I immediately knew that this character was going to be a woman, not because I wanted to write from the point of view of a woman, but because it's something that I have been observing for many years, like the most strongest and at the same time adaptable human beings in the world are the women who have to travel by themselves, who have to travel alone. So it's something that came together really organically in that sense.
Is there a symbolism in her name, Makina?
Makina, yes and no. Makina comes from well, it's a name that I just made up. I remember looking at words in a dictionary of Otomi words, which is a language, a native language in Mexico. There was a word called maki, which I don't remember the exact meaning, but it was something like loving sister or helping sister, something like that. And I just added another syllable to make it, to give it a certain rhythm and maybe create certain expectations with it, you know.
How do you work with your translator? I mean, I read this in English and was just blown away by the allegory, by the sort of lyricism. And I have to imagine that that's very difficult to capture in translation. So do you, when I've worked with the translator, it's been more mechanical. How do you work with your translation?
Well, I work with the translators as close as they want me to be, you know.
Mm-hmm.
I tried not to be a person breathing on behind the neck of the translators, because you have to respect their knowledge and you have to respect the fact that they know this other field and this other version of the world, which is every language, better than you. In the case of the English translation, which is the translation to which I have been more close, it was because Lisa Dillman, who is my very good friend, and we have been working together for years now, she really wanted to get every single detail right. You know, translation, we have to accept from the very beginning, the translation is a process of loss, because there is no translation that can do exactly what the original version does in the first language, because for many reasons, but one of them is because you are losing that what constitutes it, the language, how it sounds, its nuances, its rhythm, you know. But a good translator, as Lisa is, will find ways to compensate that, will find ways to recreate that effect that you have in the first one. So with Lisa, she told me, hey, can I just bomb you with a lot of questions? And I said, go ahead. And with each book, she would send me daily emails for months, you know, asking not only the certain things that are very specific, like the significance of certain words or the symbolism of certain characters, but sometimes just things like, what is the function of a comma in a sentence, you know, because she really wanted to recreate it properly. And this is an important word when we talk about translation. Translation is not transcription, it's recreation. Translators are creators, are artists also. And so it has always been a really fulfilling relation in that sense. And I'm really happy with the result, even the moments in which it was very difficult to find a solution, Lisa came up with really original solutions that work well in the book.
Yeah. I was very impressed. Have you ever thought of writing in English, or do your creative thoughts just naturally come in Spanish?
Well, I write a lot of emails in English. As an exercise, I have written some things in English. I have published a few really small things in English, but I don't have a literary proficiency in English. Because you know, it's not just about knowing the structure and more or less having a correct grammar, but to be able to understand the nuances in every single word, and to be able to play with that you are just being proficient, you know. So no, I think in my case, at least, if it's not a language that I learned as a native speaker, it would be almost impossible to do what I think I can do with the Spanish language.
I certainly understand, though. I did have a funny image of your publishing your emails as a scholarly product. I think
I hope not. I hope not. There's a lot of people that have been publishing their tweets and publishing their emails, and we are going to see a lot of diaries of the pandemic. So no.
As you sort of the creative process, I mean, the story of Mexico was sort of in the novel was sort of beautiful. The American side, I think, more consumerist. Sort of, how do you sort of set a scene as you're developing your story? Because, you know, some of the transitions aren't just character driven, but they're driven by the surroundings.
Well, you know, this is the thing. I try not to think my writing in terms of craft, what they call craft in the creative writing programs, which is that you plan the characters on one side and the scene on this side and the plot on the side and the symbolism, but somehow you have to prepare that before you write. Because I think that all these things have to correspond to each other. You know, it's like a scene produces its character. A language produces its scene also. You know, it's not like we have a certain place and it can be described in the same terms about every person. Literary subjectivity is literary truth. When you are describing a place, you are describing that place from your subjectivity, on where you're describing an emotion or a character. And so they all have to be linked. They all have to be intimately linked. I remember some time ago, I was in a panel with several writers from Louisiana, and a writer said something that for him, it was really important to get all the details right. He's the kind of writer that comes from journalism, from daily journalism. And there's many, many examples of great writers that come from this. And he says that he takes notes. Wherever he goes, he takes notes. And he has to describe exactly how a desk is and how the room smells and what the light is doing to the room. And I remember when my time came, I said, yeah, it's important to have the details right. But for me, it's more important to have the nightmares right. And because because the world is not something that can be objectively described as just something, as something that we will all agree. And literature underlines that impossibility and tells the truth from your own limitations, from your own anxieties. So I'm not sure if I'm responding to what you asked, but I try to make an organic scene in the sense that they all have to answer to this objectivity.
No, that very much answered it. Thank you. Just a reminder to our audience, if you have questions, please put them in the Q&A box, and I'll do my best to bring them into the conversation. Let me ask a little bit about your professional journey. An undergraduate political science major, as a train as someone with a PhD in political science. I certainly appreciate that and hope that my students go on to be as creative as you with their political science degrees. But then sort of an MA in creative writing and a PhD in Romance languages. Were you creative as an undergraduate? Has that always been a part of your persona? How did
Oh
you
yeah,
make the transition?
no, I started writing in a really early age. Actually, it's really funny. Just recently, I received an email from a professor of English that I had in primary school, an American who was living in Pachuca, that I remember writing some short stories in his class when he would ask us to write. And I have been trying to get in touch with him for decades, just to tell him that that was one of those spaces. And luckily enough, he read the book and he said, "Is this my student?" And he got in touch with me through the university email. And I said, "Yeah, and I have been trying to reach you for a long time." So no, when I reached the university, I already knew that what I wanted to know was to write literature. But I was under the influence of an incredibly stupid prejudice, which is that if you want to write literature, you don't study literature. And it is true that sometimes literary studies disencourage people to write, make them feel that you can't write because theory says that you have to write like this, like this, like this. It does happen. But now I know that if you want to write, you are going to write. It doesn't matter what you study. I have met people in very different situations, without a job or with 3 jobs, with no kids or with a disease, and people who want to write will write, you know. But anyway, that was the reason why I didn't want to study literature, and I thought that political science would give me a certain edge in understanding society beyond the immediate emotions that create literature. And I think it did. I really appreciate what studying political science did for me. You know, it helped me to understand certain ways to understand relations, certain ways to understand power, gender, things that are important to be aware when you are describing other certain anecdotes, you know. Not that you have to make a discourse in that sense, but just to be aware of the weight of your words beyond what you think they do, you know.
So we have a question from an audience member. Excuse me if I read. I'm curious about the use of the journey to the underworld and the incorporation of indigenous aspects of the text. Wondering if you can speak more on what it means to write through these worldviews and what the politics of using this as part of your story are in your view.
Well, as I was saying, that I used the narrative that I sent to Mictlan, and this is that these are traces of a disappeared world. When I was in Berkeley, I took the opportunity to research as much as I could to find the traces of this narrative. There's not a lot, and they more or less agree in the stages that you would have to go through, the underworlds, but there is not a definitive agreement of what it meant. So this is not what I was trying to do. I was not trying to interpret that. But what I was trying to do is to take this object and to put it in an alien context, which is our time and our society, and to see what this object that was doing very specific things in this other time, what this object would do in our time, you know. So the chapters are entitled following this underworld. For me, it was a way to underscore the significance of every single step of the voyage, that it's not just a certain numbers of miles that you have covered, but every step of the voyage is doing something to your understanding of the world. is doing something to your body in a very concrete way. It's doing something to your language. So yes, this is a political way of understanding traveling, understanding this kind of trip. But I also, for instance, when I was researching for this, I took the time to research many other things surrounding this narrative, like, for instance, the significance of certain colors, the significance of what north, south, east, and west meant in this society, the significance of what you were supposed to take to the underworld, because people were buried with certain things to accompany them. And I didn't want the reader to feel that they had to know all these things.
Mhm.
What I'm doing is I'm using all this knowledge just to give certain volume to what I'm saying, to give an added layer of significance. But what I am expecting is that the reader would feel that it's there, but not that you have to go through a specialized book or specialized bibliography to understand it. It's just like a way of giving more avenues or more doors to a reader to understand what I'm saying.
Mhm. That's really a remarkable accomplishment considering the brevity of, of the book. But that's more of an aside than
Well, I always think that I'm going to write long books. I have said this several times. I always say next book is going to be my War and Peace. This is going to be really long, and this is going to have all these stories and stuff. And then I start writing, and I start kind of synthesizing, and I start being really aware of the nuances and the connotations of each word, and I try to have each sentence to do different ways while doing what it's supposed to do in a very explicit way. So it starts becoming a fairly short book.
Well, let me say, as a consumer, I really appreciate that. Unfortunately, I put off my reading often until I'm about to go to bed at night, and only have a short window before sleep comes. So I appreciate shorter and more richly packed works like this. Let me ask you to focus on the contemporary border. It's back in the news. For those of us that follow it, know that it really should always be there.
Yes.
If there's a crisis, it's a 30-year long or 100-year long crisis,
Exactly.
not a function of the Biden administration by any means. But how has your thinking about sort of the relationship of Mexico and the U.S. evolved as the migration patterns have become more complex? Increasing.
I don't know if migration patterns have become more complex or we're just paying more attention somehow. It's what you were saying. It's not that there's a migration crisis right now. It's that some people decide to use that word to describe something that has been happening forever, and that now and then politicians decide that to turn this normal exchange of people and goods and values between countries as a sort of casus belli, What I think is that we're not going to start solving some of the problems that come with this until we understand that these are not national problems, and that they are not problems that have to be solved by the police. That that migration is something really complex. A lot of people are running away from violence. A lot of people are running away from poverty. A lot of people are running away from climate disaster. And a lot of people are not running away from anything. They just want to go and discover other places, and they are in the right to do that. And very often they get their papers denied for that. And we have to make people understand one simple principle. Migrating is not a crime, even when you do it without papers. That is just a bureaucratic thing, but you cannot be equated with a criminal just because you don't have a stamp. It's a very different thing. And specifically in the United States, that is a country that demands furiously cheap labor, and that furiously demands cheap drugs. You can't have it both ways. You can't furiously everywhere, in every city, in every state, demand cheap labor, and when you have it, treat them like criminals. When also, by the way, we have seen the migrants is the population that commits less crimes in society, precisely because they are all the time aware of the weight of the institutions. So this should be a shared responsibility in this specific case that we are seeing right now with the Central American countries, with Mexico and with the United States. But there is not a clear agreement on policy, or even in the basic understanding of what migration is. It used to be that the United States considered itself as a country of immigrants. But suddenly, when you hear the politicians and the CEOs of some big corporations, it is like as if the people that are here have always been here, and everything happened on merit and not by taking the land of others. So as you can see, we can just keep talking about this for a long time. But what I would say is that in the immediate steps would be like, stop every country, Honduras, Mexico, El Salvador, stop treating people as criminals. And sometimes people, well, that is really expensive, because it's cheaper to throw kids in cages than to treat them like humans. Well, then we have to start reevaluating our priorities, and then we have to start rethinking what are the things that create these patterns, and that will lead us to another very difficult path. We have to rethink how we relate to the environment, how we relate to this idea of political stability. I can't understand that people complain about Honduras coming here after the United States was complicit with staging a coup that was stabilizing the country, a coup organized by a democratic government when Hillary Clinton was Secretary of State. We have to say this because even though Trump created a really toxic, poisonous environment for migrants and legitimized violence and racism against migrants, he didn't invent this. And it has been part of the American state since its inception. And in some moments, like in this one I'm mentioning, when Hillary Clinton was Secretary of State, it has created disastrous consequences for everyone. I'm going to stop because otherwise we can just keep talking about this.
Well, it is a never-ending debate in the United States, so we can give you 3 minutes for your never-ending part. But I think one of the things that the book does so effectively is it shows the multiple migrations that many migrants are going through. That it's from the small town to the urban area to the capital, to Mexico City, I guess. Allegor, it has a nickname, the big Chilango, and then on to the United States. And I think that's something that's often missed in the American dialogue, that we don't really see the sort of process that migrants are going through prior to showing up at a border station or being caught somewhere in the interior. So I mean, that was one of the things I really appreciated in the novel. Let's focus on what's next. What are you working on these days, and sort of what should we look forward to?
Well, in a very shameless way, I just put here the two books that I just published in the last year.
Not shameless at all.
Well, this one was published first in Spanish, and now it's in English, and it's doing well. This is a historical narrative of a fire and that happened in my hometown in Pachuca, where the owners of the mine decided to close it off with many of the miners still inside, to save the mines. So they decided pretty much to kill the miners inside. So I did a whole research about it, and then I turned it into this narrative. And then I also published, this is a book of science fiction short stories. It's in Spanish. It has a really beautiful cover designed by my editor, Paca Flores, and it's coming out out in English next year. Right now, I am working in something that I thought years ago, because I'm always trying to think some projects in advance about. I want to write a novel based on the years that Benito Juarez, who was a Mexican president and would be the hero of the resistance against the French invaders in the 1860s, he was exiled in New Orleans for 2 years. Not a lot of people know this. And two key years right before coming back to Mexico and creating the liberal reform that separated church and state, among many other things. So there is an agreement that him and the other exiles that were here designed that while they were in New Orleans. And I think that is fascinating. So I have been walking around where they used to be and trying to see what they were looking at, the slavery, but also the free people of color and the commerce and the violence. And so I'm researching that really intensely. I have been for a year and a half, maybe. And I would like to go to more archives, but they're closed. And very soon I'm going to start writing that novel.
Oh, that sounds fascinating. Was New Orleans intentional? Did someone on the Mexican side think that New Orleans was a safe place to send him, or did the
Well, no, the thing is this, he was expelled of the country, and he was supposed to be exiled in Europe.
Oh.
But the steamboat made a stop in Cuba. He got out of the boat and he said, no, I'm not going there. And then he took a boat from Cuba to New Orleans, which was a very common destiny for exiles, because in that time it was really easy to get here, more easy than in other places. There are other big cities in the United States. So there was a small group of liberal exiles here. Anyway, that is what I'm working on.
Oh, that's fascinating. You were shameless, but only up to a point. You didn't give us the names of your 2 recently published books.
Oh, well, the historical narrative is A Silent Fury, the El Bordo mine fire, also published by my publisher in Britain, and other stories. And this one is called 10 Planetas, 10 planets. There's no specific, it's not about 10 planets, it's just something that it's like a way to say the universe is big. How big? 10 planets. It was just something like that. And there are some really short stories that are pretty much almost like occurrence, almost like a joke, and some stories that are more complex and more, and that sort of try to link each other.
Mm-hmm. Has science fiction long been an interest of yours, or was this just a new sort of literary?
Well, science fiction is how I started working, writing. When I was a kid, I started writing about Martians and monsters and things like that. And for me, that is sort of a principle of what I do. Even when I write about social problems or reality, what the fantastic literature, what science fiction literature gives you, is freedom to reformulate truth in your own terms. Mm-hmm. All kinds of literature do that, but specifically these genres do it in a very open way. So it's something that has always been an influence for me.
Very good. Well, that I think is a wonderful note to conclude on. So let me thank you very much for sharing your many thoughts and observations with us, and most importantly for the book, which I thoroughly enjoyed, and I know that our audience did from the questions. And let me hand the floor back to Marguerite.
Great. Thank you so much, both of you. It was a riveting conversation, very engaging, and I can't tell you what an honor it is to hear directly from the author of what was I won't say enjoyable, but a very engaging book, and very packed with just wonderful ideas and taking us through many emotions. So thank you for sharing it. It was really wonderful to hear this firsthand.
On
I
the
want to also,
contrary,
yeah, I want to also thank all of our participants as well as co-sponsors, UCI Libraries and colleagues in student affairs. I want to encourage folks to go to the UCI Great Big Read page. We have our summer reads posted up. We'll be having more events posted soon. And again, I just want to thank again, Professor Yuri Herrera Gutierrez. It was wonderful to hear from you today. I'm wishing everyone a good day and thank you for joining us. Take care.
thanks to you. Thanks, Luis.
Thank you. Thanks, Marguerite.